So, Catan Cities and Knights. Catan, sorry. um, so, this game is a little bit different from regular Catan because, in addition to building out your settlements and cities, which you still do, barbarians are attacking, and you have to use knights to fend them off. And you can level up your cities, and that's the way you get resource cards. Also, in addition to regular resources, there's something called commodities. That's the way you level up your cities, is with commodities. The commodities come from ore, which produces coin, wood, which produces paper, and sheep, which produce wool. My cat just walked across the table. So, those hexes become a little bit more intriguing because if you put a city on or wood or sheep, then instead of getting 2 resources, you get 1 resource and 1 commodity. You can trade those commodities in to level up your city, and that's how you get these really cool resource cards. But before I go into that, so the barbarians that are attacking, the first thing that you're going to know about this game is that there's a third die called the event die. This has 3 icons on it representing the barbarians and 3 icons on it that are representing the resource cards. There's 1 resource card type for each of those 3 different commodities we just talked about. So when you roll on your turn, if the barbarian icon comes up, then the barbarians get 1 step closer to Catan. If the resource card icon comes up, and there's 1 for each color, then if you've leveled up your city, then you can take a resource card. So the barbarians will move 1 step at a time, and I think it's like it takes 9 or 10 rolls for them to get all the way to Catan. As soon as they've reached Catan, you have to have enough knights to defeat them, and if you don't, someone loses their city, whoever contributed the least to the battle. If you have enough knights, which is the equal amount or more, to overcome them, then the person who contributed the most gets to have a victory point. Or if there was a tie, then everyone just gets to pick a resource card. The number of barbarians is always equal to the number of cities that are on the board. Instead of starting off with 2 settlements in the beginning of this game, you start off with 1 settlement and 1 city. So right off the bat, there are 3 barbarians that are on their way. So you have to get active knights on the board. How do you do that? You pay for them. So 1 ore and 1 sheep, so I guess it's ore for a sword and sheep for clothes, buys you the knight. You can place your knight anywhere along your roads, so they can go on the end of 1 single road segment. They can go in between 2 road segments. They can go anywhere that you have an empty little spot between roads. You can move your knights around if you need to, but that's something I'll let you read about in the rule book. So essentially, once you bought your knight, you can activate them by giving them wheat. You're going to have to reactivate them over and over again because a knight is only good for that 1 wheat for 1 action. So if they have to defeat the barbarians, or even if they lose to the barbarians, they become inactive, and then you have to feed them more wheat to get them to fight for you again. So 2 other things that the knights can do. 1, an active knight can be used to remove a robber after it's been placed on your hex. It can't prevent a robber from coming onto your hex. But the robber actually won't even rob anyone in the first round before the barbarians come because they're trying to give you a leg up. It can still take your resources if you have more than 7. A knight can also be used as kind of like a placeholder if there's a spot where you intend on building a settlement but you don't have the resources yet. You can place the knight there, but someone else, if they have another road leading up to your same road and they want to place a higher up knight there, then they can kick your knight onto a different segment of road that's open, or if you don't have any more segments of road, they can kick them completely off the board. So if you do go with the tactic of trying to use a knight as like a placeholder, you want to like be able to maybe on the next turn put your settlement down. in order to move your knight, you have to activate him, use up that activation just to move him, and then he's deactive, and you have to reactivate him again, either on that turn or next turn. So let's talk about commodities and resource cards for a second. So you can't buy regular resource cards in this game. It's just about these city-related, commodity-related 3 types of resource cards. They don't get shuffled in together. When the event dice is rolled, whichever color shows up on the event die, that is the color of resource card that you're allowed to take if you've leveled up your city to the degree that you need to. The red die is what determines whether or not you're allowed to take resource cards. So the commodities are traded in to level up your city. One of each of those 3 commodity types of the wool, aka sheep, the coin, aka the ore, or the paper, aka the wood, one of those just gets your foot in the door. When you've paid one of those, if the red die shows a 1 or a 2, and the color on the die corresponds with the color that you've paid in for, so in this case, this is one that corresponds with the ore or the coin. The yellow one is for wool or sheep. The green one is for wood or paper. So one of those commodity types paid in makes you have that first level of city, which means if the die is rolled as a 1 or a 2, the red die, and that color comes up, then you can take a resource card. The more you've traded in, like next time you have to trade in 2, the next time you have to trade in 3. So you can't just like trade in 1 at a time. You have to do like 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. If you make it all the way to you've traded in 3 of that one commodity type, each of those different commodity types has a specific reward. Like for instance, if you've gotten to the point where you've traded in 3 paper, then every time the dice are rolled, if you didn't receive a resource on that turn, then you get to take whatever resource you want. So that's a really cool perk that you can only get if you've leveled up your city. Something cool, I mentioned before that if you didn't contribute to the battle against the barbarians and you as a group have lost to the barbarians, one person has to lose a city. That person would have been you if you contributed nothing. If you had previously already bought into that city level upping, you can still retrieve those resource cards, but you can't use them again until you get a city. You also can't have more than 4 of those resource cards in your hand at any time. You also do get victory points mixed into the resource cards, but they're very rare. You can also get a victory point if you have something called the merchant. The merchant sits on a hex kind of like the way that a robber does, but he's mixed into like some of the green cards, which is the paper ones, aka wood. When you have the merchant, you can place it on one of your hexes, and then only you get to trade that specific resource 2 to 1 with the bank. So in addition to being a victory point in itself, it's also that perk. But that usually trades hands lots of times throughout the game because a lot of people have that card. So the object of the game in this case is to get to 10 victory points. You get victory points by having the most active knights against the barbarians and winning, or by having cities and settlements, by getting longest road, or by having the merchant. And then there's one additional way that you can get victory points, which is once you've leveled up your city to level 4, you get to put a metropolis on to your city for whatever type of resource that you got that level on. There's only 3 of these in the game, 1 for each of those resource types, those commodity types. So there's 1 for wool, 1 for coins, and 1 for paper. So once you hit level 4, this guy goes on the city and then is equal to 2 additional victory points. There's also a 5th level, and if someone gets to that before you get to that, they can steal that metropolis. I don't know how often that's happening. It's never happened in the game I've played. So I think that's most of the gist of it. So just keep in mind that like when you're first starting up the setup for this game, you want to pay attention to the hexes that you're getting placed onto, because having sheep, having ore, and having wood under your cities is going to get you the commodities. But having sheep, ore, and wheat is going to get you stuff that you need for your knights. Brick, just as an added thing to throw in, just because it's like probably the one that's least important in this game, is if you pay 2 brick, you can add city walls to your city, which just means that you can have 2 extra cards in your hand, and the robber won't take them away from you. So, like, if you have 1 city wall on 1 city, then you can have 9 cards instead of 7. If you have 2 city walls on 2 cities, then you can have 11 cards instead of 9 or 7. So anyway, that's the gist of it. If I forgot anything, I will just add more footage later. Okay, there's one more thing that's very important that I forgot to talk about. So in addition to the regular 2 die, you get 1 event die. That event die has 3 barbarians on the pips and 3 of the resource cards on the pips, like 1 for each color. When you roll the dice, if one of these is shown on the dice, then depending on what the red die is and what your level on that corresponding color is, that's when you can get resource cards. So if you've only traded in 1 wool, you can only get a resource card if the red die is a 1 or a 2. If you've traded in 2, then you can get a resource card if it's a 1, 2, or a 3. If you've traded in 4, so it's like first level you traded 1, second level you traded 2, so on and so forth. It keeps going up until all the way up till 5, and no matter what the red die shows, you get something. You could be leveling up your city in all 3 of these areas at the same time, and then whichever color thing shows up on the event dice, then on the event die, then you can take a commodity. You only get 1 commodity per turn. You can only have a maximum of 4 of these resource cards in your hand at one time. Otherwise, you just have to discard them. And certain resource cards you can only use when you have a city. However, if you had a city and you leveled up and then you lost that city, you can still collect the cards, and then later when you get your city back, you can use them. Okay, so now I think I've covered everything. Thanks for watching.